In the western foothills of Utah County, south of Salt Lake City, a low ridge of limestone rises gently from the valley floor. It is not marked by dramatic cliffs or visible caverns. The surface appears ordinary: scrub grass, pale soil, scattered stones. Beneath it, however, lies a complex network of narrow passages known as Nutty Putty Cave. The cave had been formed slowly by groundwater moving through soft limestone, carving thin tubes and irregular chambers. Many of the passages were no wider than a person's shoulders. Some tightened abruptly, then opened again into small pockets of space. The cave had no single grand chamber. It was a maze of constrictions, bends, and blind corridors. By 2009, Nutty Putty was well known among local cavers. It was considered a beginner's cave, close to the city, frequently visited on weekends. Its dangers were not hidden. Several narrow sections had names that described their difficulty: the Birth Canal, the Scout Eater, the Big Slide. The entrance was a simple hole in the ground, reinforced with concrete. From the outside, nothing suggested the complexity below. On a cold evening in late November, a small group prepared to descend through that opening, expecting a routine trip underground. On the evening of November 24, 2009, a small group gathered at the entrance of Nutty Putty Cave. The date placed the trip at the beginning of the Thanksgiving holiday, a time when many families in Utah traveled or met relatives. For this group, the plan was simple: a short recreational caving trip before returning home. The party consisted of several adults and teenagers, many of them related. They had come with headlamps, helmets, and basic climbing gear. None of them were attempting an expedition or a technical descent. Nutty Putty was close to the highway and often used for casual exploration. By this time, the cave had a mixed reputation. In the 1990s and early 2000s, it had been the site of multiple rescues. Several visitors had become stuck in tight passages and required assistance to be removed. In response, local authorities had closed the cave more than once. Each time, public pressure eventually led to its reopening. In May 2009, just 6 months earlier, Nutty Putty had reopened after a prolonged closure. New rules were in place. Visitors were required to obtain a permit. Group sizes were limited. Some sections of the cave were marked as off-limits, including several of the narrowest passages. Despite these restrictions, the cave remained popular. It was considered manageable for people with limited experience, provided they stayed within the main routes. Many local families treated it as a place to introduce children to caving. The group that arrived that night included men and women in their 20s and 30s, along with younger relatives. They entered in pairs, spacing themselves along the route. The plan was to descend to a well-known chamber, explore briefly, and then return. At first, the movement was slow but uneventful. They passed through low corridors, crawled over small rises of rock, and slid down shallow inclines polished smooth by years of contact. The temperature dropped as they moved farther inside. Sound became muted. Headlamp beams cut narrow cones of light across the stone. There was no sense of urgency. No one believed they were entering a dangerous situation. Nutty Putty had been explored thousands of times before. The group followed familiar turns and landmarks, marking their progress by memory rather than maps. After some time underground, the party began to separate slightly, each pair moving at its own pace. It was during this quiet, ordinary progression that one member moved ahead, searching for a particular passage he believed led to a known chamber deeper in the cave. John Edward Jones was 26 years old in November 2009. He lived in Virginia with his wife, Emily, and their infant daughter. He was a medical student, nearing the end of his first year of training. His life, at that point, followed a clear path toward a professional career. John had grown up in Utah. He came from a large family with a strong interest in outdoor activities. As a teenager, he had explored caves with his younger brother, Josh. The two had made several trips into Nutty Putty years earlier, before the cave had been closed to the public. Those early experiences left a lasting impression. Caving for John was not a regular hobby in adulthood. He did not train formally. He did not belong to a rescue organization or a caving society. But he retained a memory of certain passages and chambers from those earlier visits. On this trip, He hoped to show those features to younger relatives who had never been inside before. John joined the group as a guest while visiting family for the holiday. He had not planned the trip. He arrived without specialized equipment beyond a helmet and a headlamp. His brother Josh, who had more recent experience, was also part of the group. At some point during the descent, John began searching for a chamber he remembered from his teenage years, known informally as the birth canal. It was a narrow passage that opened into a small room. The name reflected the difficulty of entering and exiting it. The cave had changed since John's last visit. Rockfall, erosion, and rerouted paths had altered some of the internal landmarks. New warning signs had been installed. Some passages had been blocked or mislabeled over time by visitors. John moved ahead of his group, assuming he was approaching the familiar route. He believed he recognized a low, sloping tunnel that would lead to the chamber he remembered. He did not consult a map. He did not confirm his position with others. When he entered that tunnel, he thought he was following a known path. In fact, he had turned into an unmapped passage that narrowed steadily as it descended. The passage John entered sloped downward at a shallow angle. At first, it resembled other tunnels he had already passed through that evening. The floor dipped gently. The walls were close but manageable. He moved forward headfirst, sliding on his stomach, using his elbows to guide himself. Within a short distance the tunnel narrowed. The ceiling lowered. His shoulders brushed the rock on either side. This was not unusual in Nutty Putty. Many sections required controlled movement through tight spaces. John continued, expecting the passage to widen again. Instead it grew smaller. The tunnel curved slightly and dropped more steeply. His feet lifted higher than his head. To move forward, he extended his arms and pushed with his toes. The space restricted his ability to turn around. His helmet scraped the ceiling. His chest pressed against the floor. At this point, he realized the passage did not match his memory. The expected opening did not appear. He attempted to back out. The narrowness made reverse movement difficult. His boots caught against the walls. His hips wedged into a tighter section. As he struggled to retreat, gravity shifted his weight forward. His body slid farther down the incline. His head moved lower than his feet. His arms reached into a narrowing pocket that ended in solid rock. He was now inverted. The tunnel tapered to a point just beyond his shoulders. His chest was compressed between the ceiling and the floor. His arms were pinned forward. His knees bent awkwardly behind him. He could not straighten his legs. He could not raise his head. John attempted to call out. His voice traveled only a short distance through the rock. He tried again to push backward, but each movement forced him deeper into the constriction. Within minutes, he understood that he could not free himself. When John realized he could not move backward, his first response was to remain still. In narrow passages, small adjustments sometimes allow a person to find a different angle and retreat. He waited, controlling his breathing, assessing the space around him. The tunnel was so tight that he could not lift his arms above shoulder level. His elbows were bent forward, his hands extended into a narrowing void that ended a short distance ahead. His chest and abdomen were pressed against the rock. The weight of his body rested on his sternum and face. He tried to pull himself backward by pushing with his toes. The angle of the slope worked against him. Each push caused his body to slide a fraction of an inch deeper. He stopped and rested again. After several minutes he called out. The sound traveled weakly through the cave. No one responded. Above him, his brother Josh had followed his path and heard faint movement. Josh crawled into the same passage, stopping when he saw John's boots protruding upward from the narrow tunnel. He spoke to him and tried to assess the situation. Josh attempted to pull John's legs, but there was little room to grip. The rock held John firmly in place. Any force applied from above caused pain in John's chest and neck. Josh withdrew and went to alert the rest of the group. The others gathered near the opening of the passage. They tried to speak to John, asking him to move his feet or shift his hips. He attempted to follow instructions, but his position did not change. At this stage, John was still conscious and able to speak clearly. He reported numbness in his arms and increasing pressure in his chest. He asked for help calmly. The group contacted emergency services using a mobile phone from the cave entrance. Local authorities were notified shortly after 10 p.m. Rescue teams began mobilizing. While waiting, the group made small efforts to relieve pressure. They passed a rope down to John's legs and tried gentle traction. The angle of the passage made it impossible to apply steady force. Each attempt increased the compression on his torso. John remained inverted, with his head lower than his heart. Blood began to pool in his face and upper body. His breathing became more labored. He was instructed to move his fingers and toes periodically to maintain circulation. Rescue workers arrived at the cave within an hour. They brought additional ropes, pulleys, and medical equipment. The narrowness of the tunnel prevented more than one rescuer from reaching John at a time. They assessed the passage and concluded that he was trapped in an unmapped fissure known as Ed's Push. The space was narrower than expected, tapering to a width of less than 10 inches near his shoulders. The first plan was simple: attach a rope system to his legs and slowly pull him backward the way he had entered. It would not succeed. By midnight, a coordinated rescue operation was underway inside Nutty Putty Cave. Firefighters, paramedics, and experienced cave rescuers arrived from several local departments. The entrance was secured. Lighting and communication lines were extended into the cave. Outside temperatures were below freezing, but inside the cave the air remained cold and still. The first task was to stabilize John's position. Rescuers took turns crawling into the narrow tunnel behind him. Space was limited to a single person at a time. Each rescuer had to lie partially on top of John's legs to reach his harness. They fitted a climbing harness around his ankles and calves. A rope was threaded through a pulley system anchored to rock behind him. The goal was to create controlled upward force while minimizing movement that would push him deeper. Initial attempts showed some progress. With careful coordination, they were able to move his body upward by a few inches. For the first time since becoming trapped, his head rose slightly higher than before. John reported brief relief in his breathing. The movement was slow. Each adjustment required minutes of preparation. Rescuers had to retreat frequently due to fatigue and lack of space. The confined position made it impossible to work continuously. As hours passed, John's physical condition worsened. Prolonged inversion caused increasing swelling in his face and neck. His heart was working against gravity to pump blood from his head. His breathing became shallow. He complained of chest tightness and dizziness. Medical personnel monitored him as closely as possible from the entrance of the passage. They passed oxygen tubing down to him. An intravenous line was attempted but could not be placed effectively in the confined space. Shortly after 1 a.m., a critical setback occurred. One of the pulleys in the rope system slipped under load. The anchor point failed. The rope suddenly went slack. John's body slid downward several inches. The movement forced him deeper into the narrowest part of the passage. His chest compressed further. His head dropped lower than before. The progress that had taken hours was lost in seconds. After the failure, rescuers reassessed the situation. They attempted to build a more secure anchor system, drilling bolts into the cave wall. The work was slow and physically exhausting. The space allowed only limited use of tools. Despite repeated efforts, each new attempt to pull him upward produced minimal movement. The shape of the tunnel worked against every application of force. Friction between his body and the rock increased as swelling worsened. John remained conscious for several more hours. He answered questions when spoken to. His speech became slower. At intervals, he was instructed to move his feet to show he was still responsive. By dawn, he had been inverted for more than 10 hours. Rescuers recognized that his cardiovascular system was under severe strain. Prolonged inversion is known to cause progressive heart failure. They continued to work, but the chances of removing him alive were diminishing. As the night passed into early morning, John's physical condition deteriorated steadily. He had now been trapped upside down for more than 12 hours. The effects of gravity on his body were becoming severe and irreversible. Blood continued to pool in his head, neck, and upper chest. His face was markedly swollen. The veins in his neck were distended. His tongue began to swell inside his mouth, making speech more difficult. Each breath required visible effort. Rescuers limited how often they attempted to move him. Every pull increased the compression on his chest and risked further injury. The confined space prevented repositioning him to a safer angle. He remained fixed, head down, unable to shift his weight. Medical personnel explained to the rescue team that prolonged inversion places extreme strain on the heart. The heart must pump against gravity continuously. Over time, this leads to reduced cardiac output, fluid accumulation in the lungs, and eventual heart failure. John began to complain of chest pain and difficulty focusing. His responses grew delayed. At times, he stopped speaking altogether for several minutes. Shortly after 3 a.m., he told rescuers that he could no longer feel his legs. Movement in his feet became weak and irregular. His arms, pinned forward, were numb. The rescue team considered drilling a new exit tunnel to reach him from above. Engineers on site assessed the rock and concluded that it would take many hours to excavate safely. There was no guarantee it could be completed before his condition became fatal. By early morning, more than a dozen rescuers had taken turns in the narrow passage. Fatigue was widespread. Equipment was failing under constant load. The cave walls provided few stable anchor points. John's breathing became increasingly shallow. He required continuous oxygen. His blood pressure, measured indirectly, was falling. At approximately 5 a.m., after nearly 20 hours inverted, he became largely unresponsive. He could no longer answer questions. Only faint movements in his feet indicated consciousness. Rescuers continued to attempt small adjustments to the rope system, hoping to gain even a few inches. Each attempt failed to produce lasting progress. Shortly after midnight on November 25, 2009, after nearly 28 hours trapped upside down, John Edward Jones suffered cardiac arrest. Medical personnel were unable to revive him. He was pronounced dead inside the cave. After John's death was confirmed, the rescue operation changed in purpose. For several hours, teams continued to evaluate whether his body could be safely recovered from the passage. The conditions had not improved. The tunnel remained as narrow and unstable as before. Any attempt to apply force risked injuring rescuers or causing further collapse. Engineers and cave specialists reviewed the position. John's body was lodged in the narrowest part of the fissure, deeper than before the pulley failure. His chest and shoulders were tightly compressed. There was no practical way to reposition him. By the afternoon of November 25, officials made a final decision. The cave was declared too dangerous for further recovery attempts. The risk to rescuers was considered unacceptable. The passage where John lay was sealed with concrete and rock. A small plaque was placed near the entrance of Nutty Putty Cave, marking the location. Soon afterward, the entire cave was permanently closed to the public. Steel gates were installed at the entrance. Nutty Putty Cave would never reopen. John's body remained where he had died. Nutty Putty Cave today is quiet. The concrete-filled passage that held John Edward Jones stands as a permanent reminder of the risks beneath its surface. The rest of the cave remains untouched, its narrow tunnels and chambers preserved in the limestone. No visitors are allowed. Headlamps no longer trace the low ceilings or slide across smooth stone. The site has become a point of reflection for cavers and families alike. Training in confined spaces, adherence to permits, and caution in narrow passages are now emphasized more than ever. Emergency response protocols have been revised, both locally and nationally, in recognition of the limitations encountered during the Nutty Putty rescue. The cave itself retains its natural formations. Water continues to flow slowly through fissures. Stalactites and thin rock ledges remain undisturbed. Silence dominates the underground chambers, carrying the memory of a life lost quietly without spectacle.